Welcome to today's episode of the Grind Road to Success podcast, the place to be if you want to learn how to set yourself apart from the competition and reach your highest potential. I'm your host, Zak Krysak, and if you haven't already yet, hit the subscribe button so you never miss out on another podcast episode and the many tips, tricks, and strategies that can help you reach your highest potential. Without further ado, let's get into it. Today, we have the pleasure to sit down and talk with former elite athlete, Olympian, and performance coach, Tom Graham. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today, Tom.
You're welcome. Pleased to be here.
So let's dive right into it. Let's talk a bit about your experience as an athlete, kind of what you went through, and the lessons you learned along the way from youth levels to the professional levels, and how you performed throughout that.
Sure. Thanks again for asking me. And of course, you're affiliated with the same baseball team as my youngest son, so it's a real pleasure to be here. I guess the first thing was the role of parents. So my dad was important. We played ping pong in the basement when I was about 8 to 12 years old, probably longer than that. And it took me about 4 years to beat the guy. So you learn perseverance in a situation like that. So I think no matter how good you are or how poor you are in activity as a parent, there's always room to play things with your kids. And chances are you begin as a better ping pong player, for example, than your kids might be. And so you bring them along. We spent time in the backyard learning how to throw a curveball. So I was a left-handed pitcher when I was a runt. And we spent time learning a curveball, and I guess that qualifies as play. But I did it with my dad, and we'd laugh and at our mistakes and things. But eventually, you learn how to throw a curveball, and you walk around the corner and do the same thing with your friends. So all those things qualify as play, but all those things also qualify as extras that you can do as a kid. Outside the confines of regularly scheduled practice. So those are important. I played whatever was in season. So if you have ever listened to the Hall of Fame induction interview with John Smoltz, that was his main point. If you're a kid, play whatever's in season, and then you'll come to a certain place in your life where you pick one of them or you pick two of them and you concentrate on those. But play all of them, get involved and see what turns your crank. I eventually got involved in baseball and volleyball, and there's kind of a funny story about how I ended up prioritizing volleyball over baseball. We played in the Comox Valley once, a touring San Francisco baseball team called the Siskiyou A's, and these guys were really good. And for some reason, I had all of my stuff that day. I started against them, and I shut them out. And there were a couple of scouts in the stands in my hometown at that time. And they said, we'd like to keep an eye on you at your island championships. We'll look at you again. And what ended up happening was that I was also ID'd by a guy named Vic Lindell with BC Volleyball. He'd come up to my hometown, done an identification camp, and I made the mistake of asking him a couple of questions, so he thought I had a good attitude. So he invited me to 160 boy identification camp or selection camp, which was the first selection camp on the trajectory to the 1975, dated myself there, Canada Games. So I went over there, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes because it was part of the developmental trajectory. But I didn't pitch for the 7 days that I was over there at the provincial volleyball camp. And you can guess what the predictable result was when I showed up at Islands about 4 days after that. I got shelled, and the scouts went away. And so volleyball effectively torpedoed what might have been a very promising baseball career as a left-handed pitcher. But that's sometimes the way your options get eliminated, and sometimes the reason you go in the direction that you do. So what ended up happening was after that camp in Mission, I'd gone into the camp, and they put me in the top group for some reason that I really didn't understand. And I didn't belong there. Every night when we played our scrimmages, I was basically the main reason why my team lost. And so after a week of this, I went back to Comox, BC, my hometown at the time, with my tail between my legs. And now I had a decision to make. Do I quit, which would have been the easy thing to do at that point, or do I do something about my miserable existence as a volleyball player? And there were a couple of mission critical skills. One was my vertical jump, which was pathetic. And the other one was a skill area called serve passing in volleyball, which was also atrocious. And so those became areas that I focused on because they needed the most work. And it was interesting. They gave us a provincial jump training program that was beautiful in its simplicity. Took about 25 minutes to do every day. On the days you weren't doing the resistance work, you went out and jumped at a centimeter card to find out if you could get that next realistic, challenging performance goal of the next centimeter up. And so there was feedback every second day on how your training was going. And one of the most startling results I've ever experienced in sport, with respect to me anyway, was that in 6 months, that 20 centimeter card was gone. I had 8 inches or 20 centimeters on my vertical jump that I didn't have when I started. So that kind of sold me on the extras, doing the extras and taking areas that have room for improvement and then tackling those, because you're going to get better fastest than if you continue to work on your strengths. The other thing was serve passing, and that was simply serving a ball against a wall. You know, it's filled with air, it bounces back, you lock up, you pass a ball to a spot on the wall that corresponds with a set of setter's hands, and you can get 10,000 reps a year in that nobody else is doing. And so vertical jump, serve passing became things I worked on to try and reel in people that were better than me at that time. And it eventually resulted in my being selected to that Canada Games team that won a gold medal in '75. But the other thing that was interesting about that, Zach, is that those two areas were mission critical weaknesses at the time I started tackling them as a 16 or 17-year-old. 2.5 years later, I made an Olympic team. And in the words of my Olympic team coach, he said the main reasons you made this team was, 1, because of your attitude, but 2, because of your vertical jump and your serve passing. And of course, again, these were mission critical weaknesses at the time I tackled them 2.5 years previous. So I guess there's a lesson in there somewhere for young kids coming up. And after Canada Games, I played a year of university ball, and then in a surprise, I went through a brutal national team camp, and they selected me to the training squad, and eventually I weaseled my way onto the 12-man team that participated in the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. So that's awesome. pretty much my story.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us, Tom. I just want to take a second to backtrack a little bit. And I want to ask you, when you were going through that process and those couple of years that, things weren't going your way, or, you were maybe struggling relating with, that vertical you had and just trying to make the team, what was your mindset like going through all of that? And how did you cope with, facing those failures, challenges, or not getting the results you want in the moment?
Well, I can answer that, I guess by just citing a goal setting reason. We were fortunate because the way the coaches on our provincial team tested us was actually quite ingenious. They would rank us every time we went to a provincial team camp. So Mission would have been the first one, but then there was one in Winfield. There was, this is out in BC, of course. But there were 7 or 8 of them. And every time we went in, they would test us. So they would rank us from 1 to, 45 or 50 when we started, to 1 in 15 or so when we were trying to get down to the last stages of selecting a 10-man Canada Games team. And that was an ego hit, because if you were the 15th guy, you didn't want to be there. And sometimes that was tough on me, for sure, when I was like the 15th guy. But once you get up to the 7th or 8th guy, or get up to 5, which is as high as I ever got, you feel like you've gone from 15 to 5, and that's good. The question is, how does the person who's now in 15th spot feel? Well, the other part of the goal setting piece, or the testing piece, that was so brilliant was the coaches also tested us in terms of our improvement from camp to camp to camp to camp. And so you could be hypothetically the 15th ranked player, but you could also feel good about yourself at the same time, because the coaches would be saying, yeah, they're the 15th ranked player, but they're also improving faster than anybody else in this area and this area. So you always had something that you could feel good about yourself doing. I guess the other 2 parts in answer to your question is that centimeter card didn't go away in one day. It went away in 6 months. So every day you're jumping and trying to get the next centimeter up. So basically that centimeter card was, I'd jump as high as I could with chalk fingers, reach as high as I could on a post, and then get up there on a ladder and extend the bottom of the centimeter card to the top of the chalk smudge. So it extended upwards. So every day you're looking at a next centimeter up. When I reached that, it was sort of hallelujah, my training's paying off. And now I'm going to get up there, I'm going to cut the centimeter off. And back in those days, when there was no email or anything, I'd put it in an envelope and I'd send it down to my provincial coordinator and say, look what I've done. And he'd go, well, geez, I guess Graham is adhering to his provincial jump training program because he's going up. And that was fun, because it kept things interesting. Every day, the next centimeter up was a realistic, challenging personal improvement goal about, whether or not you were getting a little bit better. Didn't happen every day, but it happened often enough that you were hopeful every day. I guess the other thing that was really important is I had a guy on the provincial team program who was at that time trying to figure out life as a young volleyball player, just like I was. So we decided to train pretty hard and do the extras. And so we compared notes all the time. So it was almost like each of us had an accountability check for the hard work that we were trying to do and the extras that we were trying to do to improve, reel people in and be the best we could be.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And yeah, I love that kind of analogy and situation you said, where it was just about getting, that 1 inch, that 1 centimeter, or that 1% better each day, right? And over that sustained period of time, of course, right, from your own experience, look at the results you got and how that affected your performance over, the long term. And I see so many athletes, especially at the youth ages, and right, they have dreams to go pro one day, or, be that starter on their team, win that championship. But then when it comes to actually putting in the work, right, that's what makes all the difference. And, one thing I really think that helps me, and it helped me when I played, especially at the college levels, was just that mindset of getting 1% better each day, right? That's all it took. Is if I'm getting 1% better each day, I'm moving forward. That's progress. And right, over a sustained period of time, that's where you start getting the results you want and seeing those massive changes and growth, especially in your performance. So I guess relating to that, how did that make you feel when you started getting the results you wanted and made those Olympic roster teams?
Well, it made me hopeful, because I went through 5 or 6 camps, that had 160 kids in them at the start to, maybe 80 kids the second camp, 40 kids the third camp, and it just went on and on. And this culminated in a selection process to a team called the Pacific Rim Championship Team, which was a BC team that was going over to Hawaii, which wasn't a bad gig at the time, to play against other Pacific Rim nations like Korea and Japan, the United States. And I was the last player chosen. I know I was the last player chosen, even though no one told me that. Squeaked in by the skin of my teeth. And, I often wonder where life would have gone if I had been a player who was cut as opposed to the last player chosen. Would I have taken up something else? Would I have continued to pitch? Those sorts of things. But it made me feel hopeful in a word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So after your experience, competing at those high levels, now that, of course, you've been coaching for how many years, what were the biggest lessons you learned throughout that process? And I guess just in hindsight, what do you realize that you wish you knew back when you played at those, youth or younger levels in your days?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big thing. The accountability check piece was a huge thing, Zach. I'm mentioning this again, but the guy I worked out with virtually, he was in Williams Lake, I was in Comox, so we didn't really work out together, but we sort of compared notes. That became a real theme for my management of in this case university volleyball teams and provincial team volleyball teams. When I began coaching at a more elite level. And one of the things that we did in accordance with this partnership I had with this guy in Williams Lake was that we paired players up. And we paired players based on their affinity for one another, might have been a friendship, where they had come from initially, if they came from the same place, for example. And they worked out together. With our provincial team that won Canada Games in 1987, we had 6 players from Yorkton. So it was pretty easy to pair 3 pairs of guys up, and they would work out at a certain place and a certain time that worked for both of their schedules. And they were there to help feather the last couple of reps up when you couldn't do it yourself, and just provide an accountability check for, yep, you're here with me. If you don't show up, I'm disappointed because you're compromising my workout. We can help each other's workout by being there. And so that became a real theme for, I guess, developing the extras especially in developmental teams that were highly trainable at 16, 17, 18 years old, that sort of thing. I think the other thing was probably, we spend so much time in the technical, tactical, and physical aspects of our sport. We go to practice and we develop those. We may even in a weak moment go into a gym and pump some weights because we think that's going to help us. So those 3 areas are areas that we generally do as a function of being part of an elite athletic group. The sports psychology or psychological skills training part of it may or may not be there. And I guess one of the things I'm here to say is that if we have a bad mental game, it can torpedo or short circuit all of the technical, tactical, and physical work that we've done in order to try to play our best, and may in fact prevent us from playing our best if our mental game is not where it should be. The corollary, the positive, is that if we have a great mental game and we're our own best mental trainer, then we can go out and unleash the considerable technical, tactical, and physical work that we've put in and around the gym or in and around the ice, whatever the venue may be. So back when I started, there weren't very many people, weren't very many resources that could help you understand how you were to prepare consistently to unleash that work that you had done. And I can remember we were playing the United States in the Winnipeg Convention Center, and we'd never beaten these guys before. But we knew we had the team to do it. And I can remember we had an 8:00 game with them. I'm sitting there at 12 noon in my house in Winnipeg, and I can't sit still. I'd read a magazine, I'd cross the room and read another one for 30 seconds, cook spaghetti, bake cookies, things I never did because I needed something to do. I had to be doing something. I couldn't sit still. So I was edgy. I couldn't wait for the game to start. Here it was 12 noon. The game's at 8. I'm asking myself, why can't we start at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Let's get on with it. So I was anticipatory. I was anticipating the event. And thirdly, I'd put in the extras, and I felt like I had done the work to perform well against the States, assuming I got myself in a good space to play. So edgy, anticipatory, and confident were probably words that would describe how I felt before that game. And then the game started. And every athlete who's been through a career type game will be able to identify with this. I couldn't remember the 5,000 people in the stands. I couldn't remember the score at any given time. I couldn't remember talking to my teammates on the court, even though I know I did. I couldn't remember anything my coach told me in timeouts, which may be a bit maladaptive, but that's how absorbed I was in the process. And the U.S. was just this faceless blur of red, white, and blue on the other side of the net. So it was just me and a volleyball that night. And I got out of my own way, and I allowed all that technical, tactical, and physical preparation that I'd done to be celebrated in that game. I got out of the end of the game. We were out there for 2.25 hours. It seemed like we were out there for 45 minutes. It just slipped by. And I said, man, I was good tonight. And someone had mentioned to me at some point, how you feel before you play has an awful lot to do with how you play. And I really thought about it after the match. And my question to myself was, if I have to be edgy, anticipatory, and confident to be able to pull off a performance like this, and if I'm interested in doing it again and again and again, why in the world wouldn't I want to feel edgy, anticipatory, and confident before every match for the rest of my life? And that's when what they call an ideal performance state or a pre-competitive target became a target for me. And, if I have the target, I'm a little bit too high, I can bring myself down. If I feel like I've crawled out of bed in the morning and I need to go up, well, I can visualize some things that can get me closer to how I need to feel to give myself the best chance to pull off a career, or at least an excellent, or at the very least a satisfactory performance. So what ends up happening is you end up having the highs, which happen 25% of the time, those career type performances, but where normally you'd get deep valleys where a coach or a teammate would not even be able to recognize you. And instead, because of the homework that you do, you've got those high points, but then those valleys are very shallow. So what you're left with at the very lowest level is a satisfactory performance. You never get those big dips. And that lesson became a huge lesson for me, like a life lesson for me in terms of how to get consistently prepared so that your performance that follows is also consistently good, if not excellent. So sure. Those were some lessons, but you had to figure that out back in the day on your own. Nowadays, there's guys like yourself. There's resources. There's old guys like me that can help people. Maybe discover that when they're 16 or 17 or 18 or 12 or 13 in the case of some of the kids I work with, instead of waiting until they were 20 or 21 and finding this out through trial and error.
For sure, for sure. And those are some great points, Tom, especially relating to, that difference between the mental aspect and the physical aspect. And I feel like, from my own experience as well, and I'm sure you can relate, is back then, right? Most athletes only focus on the physical aspect of things and, right, just getting into the gym, putting the reps in, right? Um, Going to your practices. But when you talk about the highs and lows, especially relating to performance, right? Whether that's in your sport, in studies or just life itself, if we can't manage, right, those ups and downs and stay consistent with them, it'll become very challenging, especially to get the results you want, but then staying positive throughout that, right? Because I'm sure you can relate, especially competing at those high levels, thinking about, how much pressure, stress, and, standards you had to perform at those levels and how it could affect you, right? Like you said, that one day you're super, jacked up, ready for the game. Um, but yeah, vice versa. Some athletes are not prepared or they're not excited or motivated for the game. And yeah, it's just interesting how the, I guess, factors of performance can be dictated, especially over the sustained period of time. And yeah, a lot of the kind of lessons you said and things you realized, I feel like so many athletes, if they focused on when they're younger, and that's something myself, I wish I would have, hired a coach to help me with my mental game, just help me stay prepared, help me to stay in it, and help me stay positive at the end of the day, because I'm sure you can relate that the grind and student athlete lifestyle is not easy, right? There's challenge after challenge, failure after failure. But I feel like if, yeah, we can utilize both sides of the game, the physical and mental aspect, that's when you're going to start getting the results you want and truly start reaching your highest potential as an athlete. So I want to ask you now, Tom, what do you think separates elite athletes from average athletes? Do you think it's more physical side of things, more mental side of things? From your experience, and the athletes you've worked with, what can you say or identify that separates, an elite performer from just an average athlete or performer?
Well, I think there's probably three things. So I'm just writing a few of them down right now. But I think one is you have to be willing to do the extras. There's too many people to pass that are initially better than we are, for us to expect to be elite if we don't do those things. And what we usually do with athletes that are looking for areas to improve in is there may be 5 or 6 or 7 of them, but we ask them to identify a mission critical area that has room for improvement. And to do that, we usually do it through a page 1 and a page 2. So we'll just ask them to list the components or the mission critical demands of their sport on page 1. And then on page 2, we'll ask them to prioritize what's on page 1 on page 2, from most important to least important. And we usually say, does it make sense to tackle priority 1 and priority 2 on page 2? And what most of the time the answer is yes, because we can spend a lot of time doing extras in the service of areas that we're already strong at. So let's say this is our performance ceiling and we're already up here. We can spend an awful lot of time hammering away at that mission critical skill area and not see the gains that we would if we take something that's down here and has room to improve to reach its performance ceiling. And so if you're asking the question, how can I get better fastest? And where does my source of hope come from? It's probably in the areas that are, 1, mission critical. We need them. They have to be a part of what we do. And 2, they have room for improvement so that we can get better fastest, or at least as fast as possible, and faster than if we're doing the fun stuff and training our mission critical strengths. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is how you behave on a court, on the ice, on the field, whatever your performance venue happens to be. Talk to people about what a great athlete looks like. I mean, the biggest compliment I ever got as a university athlete after I finished playing national team was a guy from York University named Wally Dibe, a wonderful man, volleyball coach. We were in a tournament in Winnipeg, and he took me aside afterwards, and he said, "I got this guy who's coming up," and we sat and watched the match, and he said, "This is what an excellent volleyball player looks like." And it's just a compliment that came from a coach. That compliment would be paid to any number of people over the millennia that sport has been in existence. But you need to do the extras to make yourself look like a superior athlete in your chosen sport. I think a lot of that has to do with your pre-competitive preparation, which we've talked about a little bit. I mean, when you have a career competition, do the biggest favor you can do for yourself while things are still fresh in your mind after it's over. Grab a piece of paper and a pencil from your coach, and while things are fresh in your mind, write down 2 or 3 descriptive words that capture how you felt before you played. Because ideal performance states, or whatever you want to call them, don't change very much over the course of an athlete's career. They're quite stable. Once you capture it, it's probably there as a target for you for the rest of your competitive life. And you can try and get there. 10 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes when you get to the dressing room before you put on your pads or whatever, we'll do it. That's all it takes. It's all the homework that is necessary to probably get yourself pretty close to your ideal performance state on any given day. So that's pre-competitive. But I think within competition is the other piece. And in sports like my own, in sports like tennis, where they're either individual or team sports, but they're separated by serves, and there's time between serves. How you use that time between serves, for example, predicts an awful lot about how you behave on a volleyball court, and the hope that you have, and the visualization of the opportunity that's in front of you. So if I've had a temporary setback, if I've already decided before the match starts how I'm going to go at the challenge that's in front of me, I'll give you an example in a minute, but if that's happened, that's exactly what you visualize in between serves. And it gives you a strategy, it gives you hope, it gives you something you could do about the situation to try and impose your will upon who the unfortunate competition happens to be. So you think about a soccer defender who's just seen video of a game, and they've got to mark a striker who has just scored 3 goals in their previous game. I mean, the initial feeling is this person could light me up. So there's worry, there's concern, there's doubt. That's always it's going to be a part of our pre-competitive mix unless we decide about something we can do about it. And so on a second look with a coach or whatever at the video, we realize that the striker has scored all 3 goals moving to their right off their right boot. What's our strategy? It's pretty simple. We overplay them to their right side, and we see how they're going to do with plan B going to their left. In other words, we're short-circuiting plan A, and we're making them go to something they're less comfortable with, or at least we think they might be less comfortable with. As soon as that what can we do question is answered, our confidence goes up, our hopefulness goes up, and our worry, our concern, and our doubt goes down.
Those are some great points, Tom, especially, relating to that confidence aspect and, how you feel and perform in the moment. What were some, I guess, just key things that you did specifically that allowed you to prepare for the game beforehand? We talked a bit about, that preparation and getting prepared, before the game, or, kind of analyzing how we played after, what were specific things you did before to help prepare to allow yourself to reach your highest potential?
Mental relaxation that I just went through, where you identify something that's bothering you, it's a source of worry, concern, or doubt, and then ask yourself what you can do about it, i.e. the soccer player example, for example, was a big part of it, because I had to go in to each competition feeling some level of confidence in order to be able to sort of celebrate my preparation for the event. But I went through, it took me a while to figure this out, because I had a penchant for playing down to my competition. So if we were favored as a university or a national team, I sometimes gave myself permission to play down to whoever we were favored against. You have some wiggle room. You can afford not to play your best and probably still survive. And I bought into that hook, line, and sinker for the early part of my career until I got tired of it. And then there were a couple of things that I made sure that I did. One was I by that time knew what my ideal performance state was. And I would get up in the morning and I would spend 10 minutes talking myself into my ideal performance state. And then I'd let the rest of the day go. I might go to university. I might do great in an exam. I might do poorly in an exam. I might have a disagreement with a friend. I might have a great time with a friend in a conversation. Those are circumstances of the day. But I found that if I dedicated 10 minutes right after breakfast to my day, then I've symbolically devoted the rest of the day to what's going to happen at 8 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night whenever we play. So the circumstances of the day just sort of roll like water off a duck's back, and you're ready to play for having prepared well in advance. So preparing well in advance was a big deal for me, but just for 10 minutes, right? And then I could go forward with the confidence. So when I got to the gym, I'd spend 5 more minutes just making sure I had tweaked my ideal performance state and I was close to it, and then I could proceed with my warm up in confidence. The other thing was that I had to get myself more invested and more interested in playing, because I would play down to the competition sometimes. We had great teams at university. We won a couple of national championships, so habitually we were playing against teams that were worse than us. So this was an occupational hazard. And I found that every athlete has a switch. And mine was this. I had to make it personal in order to get interested enough to play my best. So here's what I did. I'm not proud of this coping strategy, but it was my coping strategy. It was my switch. It flipped my switch. I'd go into the gym and I'd sit on the top floor of the bleachers before anybody else got there. And then I watched the opposition come in, and I'd pick out one guy and I'd say, what gives you the right to be here with me for the next 2.25 hours? Pretty cocky, right? But you know where I'm going. I have to make it personal in order for me then to look at the strategies, what I plan to do against the guy, and to give that teeth, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I found that was really easy to get myself excited about making it personal and then exercising the strategies that I wanted to employ to give myself the best chance to be successful against them. But I had to get interested first. Everybody, I think, has a switch, and you just have to find it based on what your needs are. Goalies in hockey will get themselves more excited by just rehearsing the idea that they need to outplay their opposite number, the other goalie at the other end of the ring, shutting down the opposing team's best scorer, the effort and conviction and activity it takes to clear their crease. Different things like that. Those are all active sorts of things that can get a person more involved personally in their endeavor and more excited as a result about the game that's in front of them. So those those pieces, making sure I was close to my ideal performance state, and then making sure I was excited enough if my ideal performance state was here and I was feeling like I just crawled out of the rack in the morning, I needed to get up here. Those were active sorts of strategies that I used to try and get myself ready to play. Every
Gotcha.
athlete will have theirs. If you're too excited to play, you need to come down. That's where the mental relaxation, such as the soccer example, would become more important than perhaps the active visualization that gets us is intended to get us more excited when that's needed. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, those are some great tips, tricks, kind of strategies, especially relating to, like you said, that performance state and how we can bounce, right? If we need to level up or we need to come down in that situation. Yeah, and especially, right, it's all going to depend on the day that things happen, right? Because I feel like there's so many factors that influence your performance and especially how you feel, right? Something could have happened that night before and you got a big game the next day, right? If your mind's only focusing on, right, what happened, or that negative circumstance, let's say, how is that going to affect your performance? Are you going to be feeling low? Are you going to be feeling jacked up or high? Yeah, and I feel like that's so key, especially to have that balance so you can perform at your optimal state and, of course, get the results you want. So I just want to take a second now to pivot a little bit, and transition to the perspective from the parent. And as someone who's, had high performing athletes and parent of high performing athletes, what is your advice now to parents, who have athletes, and what can they do to put them in a better position for success over the long term?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. One is to be there when your athletes are developing. So, that you don't want to determine which sport your kids play because you happen to play them. But if you've got any skills at all, and this maybe gets back to the John Smoltz piece in his Hall of Fame speech about playing everything that's in season for a while until you choose one or two that are priorities for you. You'll develop some skills that are transferable to your kids. My daughter, I took her to a volleyball practice once. She absolutely hated it, and she decided to take up rowing. Well, my wife was a rower, and they talked a lot more about sports than I did because of the rowing medium. My boys were volleyball players, and they simply wanted to be. It took them to a practice; they loved it, and so we continued. But my youngest son Emmett was a baseball player too, and so I coached that. But whether or not you feel like you have the ability to coach a sport, there'll be something that you can draw from your experience that will allow you to be there for your kids. I was a subpar basketball player when I played everything through high school. But I'm perfectly capable of playing one-on-one with my kid in the driveway. I'm perfectly capable of making sure there's a basket at each end of the driveway and inviting the neighbors in for pickup games if my kid loves basketball, which they all seem to do. And, we used to get parents that were in that didn't matter whether these kids were 5 or 8 or 15, they were going to play as hard as they possibly could as parents to win. And, maybe that's a little maladaptive, but in the end, your kids learn something from everybody they run into. So be there in any way that you possibly can. Be positive, because the main thing is your kids have to have a love of the sport. That's important. Go out and do the extras with them. Smile at the wild pitches that you throw when you're learning a curveball, and say great job when they hit the mitt. But be positive, and I think we've all seen that commercial on TV right now where the guy's yelling at his kid in the back seat about the worst game he thinks he's ever seen his kid play in his life. And the corollary is we can help our kids explore the love of sport if we're positive with them. Find someone who can teach them how to prepare consistently. And I guess, we've talked about that quite a bit. And I think the other thing, Zach, is probably holistically, what can our kids do to make sure that they have more than one domain in their life beyond sport? Okay, so I mean, if you look at some of the First Nations and Indigenous examples of wellness, there will be a number of different areas that converge. And if a kid has pieces of that in their life, they're likely to be fairly well adjusted. It's like the stock market. If this and this and this and this and this are in pretty good shape, and one of my areas in my life takes a dip every once in a while, I've still got those other 4 or 5 areas that are in good shape, and they help keep me buoyant emotionally. If you only got one area, and it's easily the most important area of your life, and it goes south, what is there to hold us up emotionally?
Right. And I feel like, my experience as an athlete, I feel like that's why it's so important, especially at the youth stages, to be a multi-sport athlete. Even if you're only good in one sport, that doesn't matter. Competing in the multiple different sports gives you those different insights, those different perspectives and abilities to, go on and essentially do what you want to do, right? So if football isn't your thing, but you really enjoy hockey, right? I'm sure a lot of those skills, let's say from football, transfer over that you can utilize, that can help you, right, reach your potential and what you want to do. But the biggest thing I kind of realized, and this was in hindsight as well to when I played, is back to that point of, kind of enjoying what you're doing, right? Having fun with the game and being passionate about it. And I realized if I wasn't 100% passionate about something, I wasn't going to put 100% effort into it. And that was kind of just a big mindset shift for me, because when I realized that, I look back to every point in my life, whether it be in school, whether it be in sports, just life itself. And I realized that when I wasn't passionate about something, when I really didn't care about it, of course I never put the effort into it. Right. And I feel like so many athletes, and relating back to that point of, parents and athletes, is of course, parents want their son or daughter to succeed. Do all they can, whether it's in sports, let's say music, whatever, dance, whatever it may be. But putting them in those different situations can give them so many more skills, and I guess just perspectives to help them within all aspects of life. And I feel like that's the greatest thing is, my experience playing football. Sure, I learned a lot of the physical skills, right? Abilities. Football was awesome. But the biggest thing I learned from football was that, sports, especially relating to that aspect, is we're a family, right? We're all brothers here. We're all sisters here, whatever it may be. And that, I guess, trait and that kind of lesson was a huge learning experience for me, especially later on in life, realizing that, we're all here for a common purpose. We all want to achieve this common goal, right? We want to win that championship. We want to do the best we can do. Is I'm going to do whatever it takes to help you, and you're going to do whatever it takes to help me, right? And when you have that team chemistry, that's when I feel like you can truly achieve great results. And it showed. I remember playing football is when we had that team chemistry. We were all in, and we succeeded, and we started reaching a higher potential that we could have ever thought. But just learning those life lessons in the process, I feel like is so important, even beyond just the sport itself, right? And when you can learn those strategies, let's say even just time management, if you can learn how to manage your time within sports, that carries over to your studies as well. Especially you go to the collegiate levels, you got to manage a heavy workload. And then in the future, you have a job, right? You have those time management skills throughout the entire process. And I feel like that's why it's so important, especially to work on that mental aspect, is because at the end of the day, if you're not playing sports anymore, again, back to the point of what do you have, right? What are you passionate about? And yeah, I feel like it's so important just to have those numerous different skills that can apply in all aspects of life rather than just within a sport and what you can do within that sport. Um, was there anything you wanted to kind of add on to that? That was just kind of some things I had and just kind of from my own experience relating back to when I played.
No, I agree with everything you said. I think the domains of life are huge, and they're a real secret to remaining emotionally buoyant. A kid that's going to school, let's say it's high school or let's say it's university. I'll take an example, a personal example. When I started going to university, I was in phys ed for a week, in kinesiology for a week, and I was interested in it. I wanted to teach it, etc. But I'd only taken half of my fitness test, and I thought we had an agreement that I was working out 9 hours a day with a provincial team up in the Okanagan at the time. I wasn't around for the second half, and I thought we'd had an agreement that I was in decent enough shape to gain entrance into the College of Kinesiology at the University of Victoria. I was in for a week, and then they kicked me out. They said I hadn't done my second fitness test, and so I ended up in arts and science, and I wasn't committed to it. I was an elite athlete, but I was a C+ student because I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know what the market was at the end of that academic trajectory from a vocational point of view. And I didn't know what the job was going to look like that I'd be qualified for. And then I went and did a master's degree in something I was quite interested and invested in that I thought would result in a fulfilling job moving forward. And I magically became a straight A student. So we're not dumb or we're not smart sometimes. It's a matter of what we're committed to and how much we're committed that kind of ends up eliciting whatever we're capable of. So I'm a big fan of, in the interest of expanding those domains for high school and university athletes, go through some aptitude testing. I mean, your mom is an excellent high school counselor, right? You can access as a high school athlete some aptitude and some testing and some career counseling when you're a grade 11 or 12 student. As a university athlete, you can go to somewhere at a university, and you can access career counseling, aptitude testing in the same manner. So the idea is if you can come up with 4 or 5 options that meet your aptitude, and 2 are of interest to you, and 3 have a market associated with them. Now you can make an educated choice on which of those do I think I really want to go after. And if you can do that, then you can decide on which course of study and which institution you're going to go to in order to reach that goal that is now meaningful to you. And you too will magically go up a grade and a half for identifying something that you're actually committed to, as opposed to something that you're just there doing because you happen to be an athlete. So you become a student athlete at that point. And I think it's something that it's something I encourage every high school and university athlete to do, hopefully fairly early in their experience at whatever institution they happen to be at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are some great points for sure, especially for those athletes that want to move on, right? And have dreams someday to make it to the professional levels or even just compete at the collegiate levels. Yeah, it's so important, especially just to have those different skills and those different perspectives to, yeah, exactly, not only help you within your sport, but help you within all aspects of life. And I feel like that's the biggest thing, right? Those are the biggest lessons, is if you can apply them in all aspects of life, right? Those are the biggest wins. And I feel like that can have such a big impact, just the way you feel, your confidence, your abilities, and yeah, what you want to be able to do in life. I want to ask you now, from your experience and what you've kind of been through as an athlete, as a coach, what are some of the biggest misconceptions or myths that you find within the sports world or just relating to student athletes in general?
I think to the point we just finished. This idea that you athletics and academics conspire to produce a situation where you can't be as good at either because you're involved in both. I don't know whether that makes any sense. So getting back to your point about time management, if you've got two domains of life that are really important, academics and athletics, and you happen to be at a high school or university that demands both, do they compromise one another because they take time? Each of them takes time, and there's not as much time to throw into either athletics or academics. Or do they actually unleash each other? And I think in some cases they actually unleash each other, because we know we have a minimum amount of time to devote to both. But if we've gone through the process that we just talked about identifying a road that you're committed to in academics, I think athletics and academics can unleash each other in an academic situation. So never be convinced that they're going to torpedo each other just because both take time. The other thing, I think the other misconception in athletics and in mental preparation specifically, is that you have to be through a capstone competition in order to succeed at one. So everybody says you have to go through an Olympics before you can actually go ahead and succeed at it your second time around. And there's this little thing called competitive simulation now, or I use a model called cognitive affective stress management training. And it's a 4-stage process where you work with the athlete and their coaches around identifying the what makes this competition special, or more special specifically than say an early season workout or an intermediate competition that is eventually leading up to this capstone. And the idea is to visualize everything about that top level competition that makes it remarkable, that makes it different, that makes it sometimes a bit anxiety inducing, in order for us to get used to that. So we use this typically at the beginning of the season for team athletes or for individual athletes, because what often happens is an athlete will say, I think this provincials or this nationals or this world championship or Olympics or Indigenous games at the end of the year has the potential to make me feel more uncomfortable than I'm used to. But, I'm not going to worry about that. And I'll just hope it doesn't happen when the time comes. So we do nothing. And of course, when the time comes and we recognize the scope of the thing, we go, holy crap, this is more than I thought it was. I'm uncomfortable in my own skin here. So what we try to do is we try to induce the emotion that will be part of that, the situation and the emotions that will be a part of that capstone competition early in the year. And we'll maybe dedicate, we'll go through that process before an early season practice, then a later season practice, then an early season event, maybe a mid-season event that's a little more important, a little more close, or a little closer to the capstone competition. And what we're doing is we're using that process to successively approximate what's going to happen at the end of the year. The other stages in competitive simulation or stress management training that I use is there's no point in inducing a bunch of emotion that's going to make the athlete feel uncomfortable if we can't do anything about it. So we'll pair the induction of emotion in stage 1 with the mental relaxation, physical relaxation, just rhythmic breathing and different sorts of breathing exercises and things like that. and then positive visualization around what you have to do to succeed in this situation with the induced emotion in stage one. So stage one is about inducing emotion. Stage 2, 3, and 4 are about managing it or turning it off. And in the process, hopefully you get a little bit, you're a little bit better prepared for dealing with an incredibly important competition that can rear its ugly head at the end of the year if you're not prepared. Now, this way, I think you are, and I think it's a source of confidence for the athletes. So that's another misconception, is that you have to be at a top level competition once before you can go ahead and do it the second time. You can do it the first time. It's just a matter of how you prepare.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I agree 100%, especially relating to that training aspect of most athletes, especially at the youth stages, right? I feel like even the high school level is they just go into the game, right? They'll go to their practices, but then they go into the game either expecting to play at 100% or just going in there, right? Not really expecting anything. So I feel like that side of the training, I relate it to, or I kind of call it chaos training with our athletes, is putting them in those situations, right? Those uncomfortable or stressful situations that allow them to start adapting and start getting more comfortable, right? So that when those situations or those things happen in a real live game, it becomes automatic, right? And I just like to think of it as a muscle. If you want to grow, you want to get bigger, you want to get stronger, right? You got to lift weights. But in that process, what are you actually doing? Right? You're hurting yourself, you're pushing yourself to failure, and you come back stronger. So I just think about it in that exact same sense, is if we can, put ourselves in those situations that allow us to step outside of our comfort zone, that's when we're going to start getting the results we want. And of course, the key there is, with many athletes and most people in general, is just that ability to step outside of their comfort zones, right? Because we have these fears, we have these anxieties, these worries of, what might happen if we do, or what will people think of us if we step outside of our comfort zone and do something different. And I feel like that is so, so important, especially relating to a training side of things, is preparing yourself for those situations that might not happen, right? Those crazy hectic situations where it's at the end of the game, right? And you have nothing left in the tank, but you got to give it your all and you got to prepare yourself for those situations that could happen, right? And I feel like at the end of the day, that's what makes all the difference, is if you can make those tough plays, if you can make those, challenging situations and create positive outcomes, that's when you're going to start seeing massive results and changes compared to just focusing on the basics, right? The basic plays, the basic situations that might happen is, sure, those might be the most common, but again, when it comes down to it, that championship game, right? Going to that championship game and seeing that unique situation is, if we can't handle it, then it'll be very tough to get the results we want, right? So just kind of relating back to that training aspect, I couldn't agree with you more on that aspect. And I feel like so many more athletes really need to focus on that side of things to get the results they want. Because if they can't handle those pressures, those stresses, those failures in that situation, then it becomes very hard, right, to continue forward and keep getting the results you want. But yeah, I guess, I just want to ask you one last question, Tom. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today. Is What is one specific thing? I know you've given us so much value and information here already, but what is one specific thing that you would suggest for other athletes to reach their highest potential and performance? Whether that's in their sports, studies, or just life itself.
Wow. That's a good question. One thing. I'm trying to think of some of the things that we've talked about and how we would generalize that. I think the biggest thing would probably be develop an accountability check for yourself in every area you're involved in school or sport. It could be a guy or a young lady that you're working out with. depending on what type of team you're involved and who your teammates are. It could be whittling that page 1 and page 2 down to a couple of priorities that you become committed to. And I think those sorts of things are valuable because ultimately we're responsible for describing ourselves and where we want to go and what we're a fit for. So describing those mission critical limitations to us that we want to go after is something that we describe to ourselves, right? Our ideal performance state is something that we describe to ourselves through our experience. We have a great performance, we get a piece of paper, we write down how we felt before, and that predicts our accountability to try and get there again and again and again. What sort of vocation you want to be involved in. That may be done with the help of a school counselor or a service that a school counselor recommends. Same can be said about the university experience if you haven't done this in high school. It can be done in concert with other people who will help you along, coaches, professionals that can provide advice, but ultimately you've sought that advice. And so once the advice comes down the pipe, you're committed to it because you've been part of the decision-making process. So don't let anybody else decide what your path in life is going to look like. Be involved in it yourself and then follow your gut. Because where you want to end up pre-competition, what strategies you want to use in competition between serves or between plays, where you want to go to vocationally, all of those things are things that we're involved in deciding ourselves. We're our own best goal setters. We're our own best mental preparers if we have the skills to do it, or if we access the skills from other people to help us do that and identify avenues which are priorities for us to travel. And the trail will become much more satisfying if we have a hand in our own goal setting process, and we'll be much more committed to every trail that we take towards our final destination if we have a hand in the goal setting processes that are part of that. So I guess that would probably be, off the top of my head without thinking about it too much, that would probably be my best advice.
I love it. That's awesome. Great advice. And yeah, I hope whoever is listening can take that advice and start to apply it within their life and start getting the results they want to truly reach their highest potential, whether it be in sports or out. So I want to thank you again, Tom, for taking the time to join us today and share your insight and knowledge in helping all athletes and parents be able to navigate the grind and student athlete lifestyle. So I want to, just thank you again for sitting down with us and taking the time to share all the knowledge and value you can provide for others.
Well, I'll tell you, Zach, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for asking. You've been an important part of my life too, because you were a teammate of my son's. I got to work with you a little bit in various areas, and I think what you're doing is terrific. So keep up the good work.
I appreciate the words, Tom, and I'll continue to do whatever I can to help others who are in my position, and continue to strive to be the best.
Fantastic.
Awesome. So I want to thank you again for tuning into the Grind Road to Success podcast, and we will see you on the next one. Cheers.